Hey everyone, it's you, my beloved mask. When I'm smiling, you're smiling too. When I'm sad, you're crying too. When I'm explaining how a character works, you're listening too.
Hey everyone, it's Sevy. Sparkle and her beloved mask are finally here to entertain, perform, and quite honestly, scare us too, all while bringing a ton of amazing combat utility to the stage. She might be a little bit insane, but she's definitely an insanely good support. So I'm going to cover her kit and traces, Eidolons, best Relic and Light Cone builds, teams, tips, and more in this video to help you understand how to better maximize her. Let's get started.
What's your wager? The life of a faker.
Sparkle is a 5-star Quantum Harmony support whose kit focuses on skill point utility, advancing a target ally, and providing both huge single-target and team-wide buffs. Let's review her abilities and see what she offers. For starters, when Sparkle's in battle, her talent increases the maximum number of your team skill points by 2. Then, whenever any party member consumes 1 skill point, your entire party gets a damage boost buff for 2 turns, which can stack up to 3 times. With your team and Sparkle naturally using skill points throughout a fight, this damage buff will easily have permanent uptime, while the higher SP limit will help accommodate her ultimate effect and open new SP management possibilities for your team. Next, casting Sparkle's skill targets an ally to advance their next turn by 50%. For a quick breakdown of what this means, characters have action values or AVs that are calculated by their speed and the AV formula. Their AVs count down to 0 in order to take their turn, which is why more speed equals faster turns. But one way to cut this is by advanced forward effects, which deducts a percent of the AV based on their base AV to let them advance their turn faster. So with Sparkle's 50% advance, you're removing half of the target's base AV to significantly move them up the turn queue and let them take turns faster and more often than they normally would have. This translates to huge offensive advantages and even some defensive utility. We'll discuss later how you can further utilize this effect. Furthermore, she also increases the target's crit damage based on a fixed amount plus a certain percentage of Sparkle's own crit damage stat for 1 turn, translating to a big damage boost for crit scaling characters. This also allows you to skew your DPS's own crit stats towards a bit more crit rate, since they are already going to receive so much crit damage from Sparkle anyway. There can be cases where you can hold off of Sparkle's skill if you need to do certain setups first or for skill point management reasons. But in many cases, she should be using her skill for the most part to consistently buff crit damage and advance your DPS, provided you can supply the needed skill points, of course. On that note, casting Sparkle's ultimate instantly recovers 4 SP for your team and grants the Cypher buff to everyone for 2 turns. While the Cypher is active, the damage bonus effect of her talent is greatly increased. With Sparkle's tendency to consume a lot of skill points, having her own SP recovery utility is a great help for your team's SP management. Also, a small tip to maximize the Cypher buff duration is to cast her ultimate when it's your target DPS's turn. Cypher actually won't start its duration countdown during that unit's turn, so it'll buff that turn, plus the next 2 turns, which can make it act like a 3-turn buff for them. Finally, Sparkle's technique grants all allies stealth for 20 seconds and makes you undetectable by enemies. More importantly, entering battle while this is active will immediately recover 3 skill points for the team. That's a huge starting boost for your SP pool that will greatly help enable your SP heavy rotations early on and balance out her SP consumption. Sparkle's Ascension traces also add very useful improvements. Her A2 trace makes using a basic attack additionally regenerate 10 energy, so both her skill and basic will generate 30 energy now. Her A4 trace now makes the crit damage boost from her skill last until the start of the target's next turn. This has huge potential advantages since follow-up attacks or ultimate casts performed between the target's previous turn and the next one will still benefit from the crit damage bonus. It's also a clear contrast to Bronya, whose skill advance buff strictly only lasts for 1 turn unless you have her final Eidolon. And Sparkle's A6 trace now lets her increase all allies attack by 15%. Furthermore, quantum-type allies get more attack bonus depending on how many quantum units are on the team, counting herself. Of course, you shouldn't treat that as a sign that she should be only used in a quantum-focused team, but rather, it just gives her more buffing potential in such teams. For her stat bonus traces, Sparkle gains crit damage to help her buff, plus HP and effect resistance for more survivability. As for leveling, prioritize both her skill and ultimate as they have the most significant impact to her buff values, followed by her talent. Leave her basic attack alone to save resources. Sparkle's ultimate costs 110 energy, which is on the lower side. She can guarantee a 3-turn recharge time max as long as she has enough energy regeneration rate, which you can easily fulfill with a high-level ER rope. In very abundant energy scenarios, this could even potentially go faster. Regarding her SP generation, at worst, she generates 1 SP every 3 turns if she always does her skill and with a 3-turn recharge time. In cases where she can recharge her ult in 2 turns, then that's more efficient SP generation. She can also be more SP positive if you adapt her rotations to do more basic attacks. It's up to your team's playstyle and how you'll use her in it. Ultimately, you still need to manage your team's SP and have the necessary SP positive teammates to feed your team's SP hungry units and enable a more fast-paced skill usage. Speed tuning with Sparkle is also going to generally fall into 2 routes. One is a very fast build where you're just stacking as much speed on her. Sparkle can consistently drag the DPS to her position, oftentimes making them the very next unit to move. So it's almost like she's giving the DPS her speed. Then you can trade speed stats for offensive stats in your DPS instead to maximize their damage per action. For example, going for an attack boots rather than speed. This opens up more flexibility in DPS builds and lets you worry much less about getting speed rolls for them, as you'll just be concerned about Sparkle's speed instead. On the other hand, a slower Sparkle build means that you still want your DPS to build speed, then tune Sparkle's speed to be less than the DPS's and as close as possible, like the DPS's speed -1. It's very similar to how a slow Bronya works, except Sparkle is just a 50% advance versus Bronya's 100%. So your DPS is already going at their own speed, but Sparkle gives them extra turns in between, which is basically like giving them 50% more turns. A base E0 Sparkle is already very impressive, but let's see how Sparkle's Eidolons improve her support utility. E1 makes the Cypher effect last for 1 more turn, and it now gives a 40% attack bonus. If you use the ultimate cast trick to extend its duration on your target, the 1-turn extension may not feel as impactful, but the attack bonus is nonetheless useful and it does make her ultimate timing more flexible. E2 makes the talent provide an 8% defense ignore buff for each stack, which stacks to a team-wide and permanent 24% defense ignore. Defense ignore is always welcome and becomes more potent when stacked with other sources of defense reduction or ignore. This plus the first Eidolon can be a very strong damage boost for your entire team. E3 increases her skill and basic attack levels. E4 makes her ult recover an additional skill point and also increases the team's skill point limit by 1. It's not really that impactful in most scenarios since her default skill point recovery and limit are already more than enough with basic SP management, but more a minor quality of life improvement. E5 increases her ultimate and talent levels. And finally, E6 further increases her skill's crit damage buff, and it now applies to all allies affected by Cypher, which is a further damage boost for the entire party and gives her more synergy in dual carry teams that scale on crit. Now let's move on to her relic stats and sets. Starting with the main stats, go for a crit damage body to boost her crit buff and speed for her feat piece. For the sphere, it's ideal to go with either defense or HP just to make her tankier, but really, anything with good crit damage and or speed substats should be your priority. Then for the link rope, go for ERR to help guarantee a 3-turn recharge time. For substats, your top priority is getting speed to hit your preferred target and crit damage to boost her buff. Then for more survivability, get defense, HP, and effect resistance. Now for her relic set options. A flexible and efficient build can simply be 2-piece set combinations of speed, defense, HP, and damage reduction. Since she doesn't need offensive stats, defensive stats can be more useful for survivability. Still, except for the 2-piece speed set, the other 2-piece set bonuses ultimately aren't a big deal since the main and substats are more important. These sets will allow you to more easily choose pieces that have the right main stats and best substats, especially for getting crit damage and speed subs. It's also not really essential to get a full set, but if you want to, the 4-piece messenger set is a straightforward generalist option. Its 2-piece set is efficient to farm for a lot of other units, and at least farming its cavern can also be a source of 2-piece speed plus HP build combo. If you also have a good 4-piece musketeer set for the speed bonus, that's also a good option. For a more niche set, the Eagle of Twilight line has a self-advance effect that can be used for further pushing her turns, but be mindful if it causes issues with your intended turn order. Other applicable, though generally less recommended sets can be the Hunter of Glacial Forest, and the Watchmaker, Master of Dream Machinations. As for her planar ornaments, we have a couple of options. The Broken Keel set increases the user's effect resistance by 10% and gives a team-wide 10% crit damage bonus upon hitting 30% effect resistance. And since Sparkle also has 10% effect resistance in her bonus traces, it's easier to achieve the 30% activation requirement. With this, she can really go all in her crit damage buffing utility and have more debuff resistance. Penacony, Land of the Dreams, gives a 10% damage bonus buff to other allies that share the same element as the user, so this is best utilized when supporting quantum allies and teams. There's also the Fleet of the Ageless, which gives her HP and a team-wide attack bonus at 120 speed. The attack buff is generally useful for most teams and attack scaling allies. The Sprightly Von Whack gives 5% ERR as well, and a huge first turn advance forward, which might help in very specific setups when you're trying to maximize your action count. Now let's check out her light cones, which has a great selection of free to gacha options. The past and future light cone is generally the most recommended free-to-play choice. After the wearer uses their skill, it gives a 1-turn damage bonus to the ally moving right after. So this is ideal in setups where Sparkle's advance effect guarantees your DPS turn right after hers. Its main weakness though is that the 1-turn buff limitation won't affect follow-ups or ults that trigger outside the target's turn. Dreamville Adventure is a new free-to-play Harmony light cone wherein after the user does a basic, skill, or ult, it gives all allies a damage bonus to the corresponding ability used. So basically, if Sparkle uses a skill, everyone else gets a skill damage bonus until she resets it. This can be a bit wonky or inconsistent to use though, so the past and future light cone might be easier to work with. For gacha options, Dance 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 advances your team's actions, which enables faster turn cycling. This can be particularly beneficial for attempting really fast clears and also helps Sparkle reach certain speed turn breakpoints in cycle-based battles like MOC. Planetary Rendezvous will permanently give the entire team a quantum damage buff just by having Sparkle there, so it's a great and easy-to-use choice for supporting a quantum DPS or team. Carve the Moon, Weave the Clouds is an all-around generalist support cone with useful random buffs, though it requires a BP purchase, and we have comparable or situationally better 4-star gacha or free alternatives already. For 5 stars, Earthly Escapade is her signature light cone. It's the only Harmony light cone that increases the user's crit damage, and more importantly, it has the mask buff, which gives a huge buff to all other allies' crit rate and crit damage. Her ult's instant 4 SP recovery can permanently maintain the effect, and that's just simply a lot of stat value for improving or fixing your DPS unit's crit stats. But the battle isn't over is the standard 5-star Harmony light cone. It's got the same damage bonus buff mechanic as past and future, but with the added ERR bonus, SP recovery effect, and much higher base stats. If you were lucky enough to pull this, then it's a great option. Sparkle's team synergy is very versatile and potent thanks to her widely applicable skill point utilities and stacked buffs. It's better to just discuss her general synergies and considerations as a support, as well as some special synergies. Pointing out how good she is with every DPS can end up being a very winding discussion. For starters, since she can enable a higher SP limit and recover SP with her technique and ult, that's very beneficial to DPSs and teams that can or want to be aggressive with their skill point usage. Particular DPSs like Qingchui or Imbibitor Lune, who can consume multiple SP in one action, can more so benefit from the expanded SP pool. Of course, don't forget to still have other SP generating teammates as needed to compensate for your skill point consumption. Note as well that the DPS doesn't necessarily have to be SP reliant themselves, and any other ally's skill can stack and refresh Sparkle's talent buff anyway. For example, Blade is a basic attack focused unit with very low SP consumption, which leaves room for his other supports to make use of those skill points instead. As for Sparkle's main buffs, damage percent and crit damage are appreciated by any crit scaling DPS, regardless if they scale on attack like most carries, HP like Blade, or defense for future defense-based DPS units, so she has great compatibility in that aspect. Furthermore, one great thing is that since her skill's crit damage buff also lingers after the target's turn, units with follow-up attack mechanics will have more synergy with Sparkle's buff, like Jingyuan, Clara, Shuiyi, Dr. Ratio, and so on, in contrast to Bronya's 1-turn only skill buff before E6. If you get the crazy idea of using Bronya, then you just have to speed tune them to get the most out of their advanced effects. But that can result in more intensive SP usage, so be prepared as well to have another support supply the SP needed, or perhaps by using a DPS with very low SP usage like Blade. Meanwhile, damage over time or dot units won't be able to benefit as much from her crit damage buff though, since they're not mainly built with crit. While Sparkle technically still offers damage percent and attack buffs that dot units can make use of, she's generally best suited to supporting crit scaling DPSs. The most straightforward template template Sparkle will easily slot into is a hyper carry team, where she'll be focused on buffing and advancing 1 DPS. She'll be comped with fellow Harmony and Nihility supports to boost your damage along with the sustain. And while Sparkle seems less tailored to supporting a dual carry team, especially since her skill is single target, she can still have fairly good usage in certain dual carry teams. Her damage bonus and attack buffs are still team-wide, and you can let Sparkle focus on a slower DPS that she'll constantly advance and buff, or alternate her skill between your 2 carries. There's room to experiment here to find out what works better if ever you use her in such setups. And for the Quantum lovers, Sparkle is going to be a really good pull as we finally get the missing Quantum Harmony piece for a mono Quantum team. Our 3 Quantum DPSs, Zilla, Qingchui, and Shuiyi, are all crit scaling, and Zilla and Qingchui's very SP-hungry playstyles in particular will really benefit a lot from Sparkle's SP utilities. In such teams, Sparkle will also give an absurd 50% total attack buff to Quantum units just by being there, thereby maximizing her full buffing potential. And with Silver Wolf, you can guarantee a Quantum weakness implant in a full Quantum team, which makes them able to more easily brute force a lot of battles. Finally, her auto battle behavior is very simple. In general, as long as she has skill points, she will use her skill on your DPS, so it's great if your intention is a skill-heavy playstyle. But if you had a more SP-positive rotation in mind, then this won't be able to implement that. Considering this, it'll be more ideal to have teammates whose auto behaviors aren't reckless skill spammers, or who have innate SP-positive mechanics, so the team won't run into huge SP problems. If Sparkle inserts more basic attacks due to running out of SP, this risks causing desynchronization issues with your intended turn order setup. And if ever you're running a team with 2 DPS units, check who Sparkle will target in that team, as that can affect your intended setup and team potential. Still, these issues are only a real concern in turn-limited battles like MOC or high-difficulty simulated universe modes. All in all, Sparkle's auto behavior works pretty much how you'd want it to. And that's it for this Sparkle guide. Her support mechanics and effects are fundamentally simple, but these are such massively useful buffs that give her so much value as a support. If you don't have Bronya and missed her in the 300 pull 5-star selector, or if you have Bronya and are sad you can't have 2 Bronyas to use in both MOC sides or on the same team, then Sparkle is a high value pull in my opinion. Even more so if you haven't pulled Runmei yet, the only other limited 5-star Harmony support. But let me know what you think of Sparkle, and if you're pulling for her, or saving your Jace for someone else. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!